had an oh crap moment.
Yeah.
The moment when we've declared that we're going to do something and yet we're like, oh, wait, so how am I going to get from where I am today to when I was leaving Nike and I had all this business booked, I thought, this is so funny. Oh, good. I'm not going to have to go through any of that entrepreneurial hardship. Thank goodness. That sounds hard. And then within a couple months, I was like, so if they come and take my house because I can't pay the mortgage, would I visit my sons at their father's house, or would they come to like a shelter to see me?
What's up, everybody? I'm Chaz Wolfe, Gathering the Kings podcast, coming back to you here today with another queen on the stage. Today, Dr. Taryn Marie. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Well, it's Tuesday, so how could I not be wonderful, well, amazing, all of the things, right?
Yeah, well, it's early, so I guess you'll get better.
Yeah, well, if it can get better from here, then I don't know if I'll be able to contain it all. And it's funny how we go back and forth like this with positivity, but I know that we're both serious about it. I love Tuesdays. I love Wednesdays. I love Thursdays. I love Fridays. I love them all. So I'm glad that you're here with me on this Tuesday. Mm-hmm. Tell us, Dr. Taryn, what is it specifically inside of your business? You're the CEO of the Resilient Leadership Institute. You're the best-selling author of a Wall Street Journal book. And I know I butchered that, but tell us what you do, because you have some fantastic work, and I cannot wait to get into the content of this podcast here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we'll start with the highlight reel, and then we'll dive into the pieces that have hit the cutting room floor, so to speak. We'll get the inside on the resilient stories.
Yeah.
So I am the CEO and founder of the Resilience Leadership Institute. And last year, much to my incredible surprise, I also became a #1 Wall Street Journal bestselling author of the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People. And so I've been in corporate America for a decade and a half, almost 2 decades, as a management consultant. I led global leadership development at Cigna, which became a Fortune 20 company, where I looked after the development and growth and learning of all of our leaders inside of that organization. And then I went out to Nike and I headed up executive leadership development and talent strategy, where I was aligned directly with the C-suite, with our CEO, Mark Parker at the time. And I worked with our C-suite on their communication, their cohesion, assessing their leadership skills, and our top 400 vice presidents. And so my background is really in how do we lead effectively? How do we understand what our strengths are, really know those deeply within ourselves, have a great degree of self-awareness? How do we articulate our strengths and our opportunities for growth in a way that people can understand us and we can be maximally effective? And my company, the Resilience Leadership Institute, is really about how do we effectively face challenge? And so I'm sure everybody listening to this show, we have all been in a moment of what I call the big 3 C's: challenge, change, and complexity, where we have felt overwhelmed, stressed out, exhausted, scared, uncertain about what the next step is, paralyzed by the decisions that we need to make, a sense of decision fatigue as the CEO of our organization. There's just so many decisions that we constantly need to make. And so what I've done over the course of the last 20 years is interview people about how did they effectively face some of their greatest challenges, their greatest changes, their greatest moments of complexity. And what that has lent itself to is the 5 practices of highly resilient people, or the 5 things that we can do in those moments. It is not going to make the challenge go away. It's not going to, maybe make the burn feel any less necessarily. But what we do know in those moments of our greatest uncertainty is that we are actually putting in place effective behaviors for us as leaders, for us as individuals, for our organizations, to be able to weather those storms and to create the most positive and productive outcome for ourselves, for our families, and for our businesses.
I love that. There's a formula, which there's a lot of people who like formula. But I'm hearing that there's some ingredients here that we can apply in those moments. And you're 100% right. Everybody listening here today is an entrepreneur and has either experienced those moments of sticky, or they will for sure. We both know that. I want to dive into obviously these 5 elements that you've written about, but tell us a little bit about your background first. I mean, you shared just obviously the corporate America piece, and then you've done your own thing in the consulting world. But tell me why, like the motivation behind the story, not so much necessarily the piece of what
Mm-hmm.
you've done or the resume. Give me the heart behind it. Why are you doing this?
Yeah. Well, so let's start with third grade Taryn, shall
Yeah, I
we?
love that. 8 years old, right?
Let's 8 years old. Let's rewind a couple of decades, and I was sitting in my little third grade desk in my little third grade classroom, and my teacher, Mrs. Robinson, was calling out the names of who was going to be in the various reading groups for that year. And for this, what was it? For the third year in a row, I was in the lowest reading group, you know. And so I think we've all had moments where we believe that we are made for more, where we believe that there is something greater that we are meant to be doing than what we are doing today. And the first time that I experienced that feeling was sitting in my third grade classroom with my reading group, because I thought, I am better than being in the lowest reading group. I can do more than this. And so I marched up to Mrs. Robinson and I declared that by the end of the semester, I was going to be in the highest reading group. And she looked at me and I looked at her and I pretended not to notice her skeptical look.
Sure.
And as I turned around to go back to my desk, I had, there's a technical term for this. I'm sure you've probably heard it. I had an oh crap moment.
Yeah.
The moment when we've declared that we're going to do something,
Mhm.
and yet we're like, oh, wait, so
How am
how
I going to do
how
that?
am I going to get from where I am today to get to,
That's right.
And so I did what I knew how to do, which was basically just write down all of the words that I couldn't spell and I couldn't pronounce, and then go home and practice them, at my little desk in my bedroom at night, and then come back to school and do it again. And I did that for the entire semester, and sure enough, I kept my promise to Mrs. Robinson and, more importantly, my promise to myself. And I ascended to the highest reading group at the end of third grade. Now, that may not seem amazing to you or to our listeners. It seemed like an incredible feat to me at the time. And 30 years later, I decided to get myself tested for a learning disability after I'd completed all of my formal schooling. And sure enough, we found that I was profoundly dyslexic.
Wow.
Information that would have been useful 3 decades earlier in Mrs. Robinson's classroom. And so, your question, Chaz, was, what is the heart, behind what I'm doing? And the heart behind what I'm doing is, we've all had moments where we saw more for ourselves. We've all had moments where we sat alone in our kitchen or in our car or in our bedroom trying to figure stuff out.
Mhm.
And we felt like those challenges, those changes, and those complexities were bigger and more daunting than we were formidable. And it is a profoundly lonely, scary experience.
Yeah.
And we've even had friends who haven't made it through those moments, who have had health crises because of the stress, who have taken their own lives because of the hopelessness. And so the heart is, knowing how difficult it is to go through these 3C moments. Wouldn't it be great if we all had a framework, if we all had a coach, if we all had someone speaking into our lives? And so that's really what this work is about. It's the idea that none of us now has to go through anything alone, because you now have a framework. You now have the 5 practices. You now have me as a coach if there's nobody else in your life that you can lean on. And so we don't to go through these things alone. We don't have to figure them out on our own. And in those moments when we face difficult things or simply believe we're meant for more, there's a roadmap for how we can get there.
Yeah, I love that. Isolation is such a interesting topic for entrepreneurs because I think that we all feel it. When you've described that heavy moment and you look around and nobody's there, I think we can all say, oh, yeah, I've been there, whether it was payroll or whether it was, something even smaller. You kind of look around and you realize that there's no one else carrying the weight with you. It's a lot of times what we talk about in Gathering the Kings as well. But, the moment here, the isolation, I don't find entrepreneurs that hear the word isolation or alone and like raise their hand like, oh, yeah, that's me. But once you describe the situation, they're like, oh, that happened yesterday and last week and the week before. What do you think the gap is in like the entrepreneur? Because it's almost like we're just crazy enough to kind of keep doing it over and over and over. But isolation is real, and there is a solution. There are practical steps. There's communities obviously to be involved with, and sometimes the power of that feels over there, and it's like not super practical. But you've tried to make it practical in your steps. My question here is what's the gap for the entrepreneur listening right now who's like, well, I'm not necessarily isolated or alone, but I relate to how you've described it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, which is why that's how I described it that way. Because I think when we say words like isolated or alone, I would say, you might say, many people would say, well, I'm not isolated. I'm not on a desert island
Right.
here. I'm not alone. I've got a family. I've got friends. I've got people that I'm working with or connecting with virtually. And so that doesn't resonate. But when we talk about this sense of no one else being there to figure it out, and this idea of like decision fatigue. Like decision fatigue is so real for so many entrepreneurs because what do we do all day at the helm of our organization? It's like, well, do you want the social media post to be like this or like that? Should we release this podcast or this podcast? Should we do this color or that color? Should we say this or that? Should we lead with this? And so it's just like all day. And like our people want to make us happy and they want to get buy-in from us as the CEO. But that constant needing to make a decision takes a real mental toll. And so what happens over time, I think, is we start, feeling worn down. We start feeling like we have less energy. We start feeling maybe even like a failure, like nothing we do is good enough. And no matter how hard we work, we're not going to be able to get over that hill or kind of get to that pinnacle that we imagined. And so I think what's really critical for any of us that are service-based businesses is to really understand the experience of the people that we want to serve and then use that language. Like just as an illustrative example, I was consulting with a healthcare company and they were creating a flyer, for physicians because physicians are their primary client. And so I was going over the flyer with them, right? And the flyer said, we've got this medication and, we're here to solve the problems that you might have, to have a safe, effective choice for your patients, and so that you don't have to worry about supply chain, right? And so I stopped them and I said, so I have a doctorate degree in neuropsychology. I've worked with a lot of physicians. I've worked in healthcare for a long period of time, and I can tell you that I've literally never had a physician say to me, I'm worried about supply chain, right? They've said, I'm worried about consistency. I'm worried about sustainability. I'm worried about the ability for my patient to continue to get the medications that they need to keep them healthy when they need it. But nobody's ever raised their hands that I'm worried about supply chain, right? So being able to step into the shoes of the people that we want to serve and use the language as the bridge for us to be able to understand what we're talking about and to appreciate that, we have or I have something that can dramatically improve our lives. In order to do that, language is incredibly powerful in order for that to resonate.
Yeah, so good. What about the person who wants more, but hasn't come up against a challenge. I have this phrase, and I want you to dissect it from your very smart PhD neuropsychology level. And it's
Oh,
it's
geez.
grateful but not done. And so I almost see maybe the opposite, or maybe the progressional point of what you just described, where I feel like, oh, I'm made for more than this reading group or this current level of business. I'm made for more because I'm stuck, and I see myself as being better or bigger or more than. But what about the place where I'm like, I'm so grateful for where I am, and I'm not stuck, but I'm also saying that I want more? Describe that position.
Hmm.
Or is that a different place in the mind? What's going on there?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of dropping into how you're describing this, right? Um, because I think the way that you're characterizing is this grateful but not done is a person who's coming across to me who has a great deal of kind of energy and bandwidth and capacity that's yet
Sure.
untapped.
Yep.
Has not pushed the envelope to a great extent where they've really come up against failure, come up against failure in a significant way. And then, this person in my mind is also someone who's like, I want more, but yet the more is a bit undefined. It's a bit amorphous. We hear from lots of people, I want to do more, I want to be more, I want to help people.
Right.
Well, I'm a people person, okay, well, what do you want to do with the
Right.
people? How do you want to help the people? And, I would say this was me 4 years ago. I stepped out of my corporate executive role at Nike in February of 2020. And I knew that I wanted more and that I had my company, the Resilience Leadership Institute. Now, I was a single mom at the time with my 2 sons. I had a mortgage and expenses and things like that in the city of Philadelphia. And so before I departed from Nike, I made sure that I had enough, keynote speaking engagements, executive coaching engagements, workshops booked to replace my income. And I did that with colleagues and people, in leadership development, in talent management, in the corporate space, through a handshake or, an email agreement. And then March of 2020 showed up.
Just 30 days
And
later.
we all know what happened. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Hello. And really within a span of like seemingly overnight, my 2 children, who were 5 and 8 at the time, were sent home from school to do, online learning, which was, suffice it to say, an adventure, air quotes, for those of you
Uh-huh.
that are not watching. All of that business that I had booked through a handshake and through a gentleman or a gentlewoman's agreement evaporated overnight. I now have no income. And I'm not even sure if this business is sustainable or, can add value in the current environment that I'm in. And so when I was leaving Nike and I had all this business booked, I thought, this is so funny. Oh, good. I'm not going to have to go through any of that entrepreneurial hardship that people thank goodness. I'm just going to bypass all of
I just whipped it.
that. That sounds hard. And then within a couple months, I was like, so if they come and take my house because I can't pay the mortgage, would I visit my sons at their father's house, or would they come to like a shelter to see me? How would that work? These were some of the topics that I was trying to work through in my mind. And I was on a 30-day burn rate for 36 months. So we all know that's finding the cash to pay ourselves, to run our companies, and to pay the people who are working for us, who are supporting their families every 30 days because I didn't take any outside investment. And that's exhausting. What has happened, what happens in moments of pain and difficulty is that our vision gets really clear. When we can't breathe, every cell of our body is looking for oxygen.
That's right.
When we're hungry, every thread of our body is looking for food. And so I went from being that person that was like, I think I'm meant for more and I want to do more and contribute with regard to resilience, to being somebody who can really tell you in a crystallized way, like, here's the framework. These are the types of things that you're experiencing. I know you're experiencing them because these are the people that I'm coaching all the time. And I've been there as an entrepreneur. And, I was watching a video on Instagram that Ed Milet put out. And I just love Ed. And I had the honor of being on his podcast last year. And he puts out all kinds of things. And I'm always real close to crying, but I don't, And I said, Ed, this one got me. This one got me. Because he talked about how when he and his wife were first married, he said, you can do a lot of things when your car is repossessed, when your electricity's turned off, when you're evicted from your apartment. He said, but when they turn the water off, that's when you're really up a creek, when you don't have water. So he and his new wife, his new bride, as he called her, would go down and they would shower in the pool, the outdoor pool showers. Yeah. And she would hold up a towel for him. And then he would hold up the towel for her and they would shower. And he said, I went through that hardship so I could be here today and be present for yours. And that's how God works.
Yeah, it's huge.
And that's how pain works. God doesn't waste a drop of pain in our formation. All of that pain gets used to crystallize, to cauterize, to form us into a clearer, more empathetic, wiser, more compassionate version of ourselves. And if you don't know, if I don't know, if we don't know where that pain is leading us, well, welcome to the club, because nobody does in the moment.
Right.
But on the other side, we come out and we're formed, we're changed, because we're no longer somebody who has an amorphous or kind of general idea about how we want to show up in the world. We have a crystallized vision of just how strong we are and the unique strengths and talents that we bring to the table in service of humanity.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I would highly suggest that the listener just hit the repeat, just hit that little back 30-second button and listen to that again. Yeah, hit it a couple times. The power there of you number one, you telling your story, but it just resonating. Obviously, you know what you're doing here, but that really does transfer courage to the listener. So I appreciate you saying that. What is resilience? I don't know if I want to say what does it mean to you, but you had your company before you left corporate America, and so resilience was, in your DNA from before you jumping off and doing the thing in the COVID era. What was the beginning, or what was the catapult of saying, no, I'm going to create an institute around this. This is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it started actually, Chaz, from, despite being dyslexic, I really like words and I really like language. And I think you could describe me as a dork or a nerd or, something like that. And so it started actually from hearing this word resilience and thinking, wow, that seems like a really powerful concept. I want to know about that. And then going over to the dictionary and it's saying, resilience, to be resilient. Right. And I was like, okay, resilient, resilient, to demonstrate resilience. And I was like, okay, that, I don't have much to go on here. And so, we all have resilient stories. Every single one of us. Today you've gotten to hear a couple of them. You got to hear my story about learning that I was dyslexic and going through school as a person who's, neuroatypical, as we would say today. You got to hear my sort of entrepreneurial genesis, oh crap, am I going to lose everything in this moment story? And there's more. There's more where that came from. But I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that resilience is the essence of being human. So many of us are walking around with this idea that it's something we've got to go out and find. It's something we've got to go cultivate. It's something that we may not have enough of. We might be unworthy or lacking when it comes to resilience. And in fact, resilience is the essence of being human. It is fundamentally tied to our humanity. It exists within all of us. And we can amplify our resilience through practice, through the practice of the 5 practices. And so for those of you that are listening right now, I think that is such an important key takeaway, because people come to me and they come to my talks with a little bit of what I like to call resilience dread. And what that means is I'm going to be found out. Maybe I don't have what it takes. And in fact, when we know that it already exists inside of us, we sort of, if you've seen that movie, The Wizard of Oz, we show up like Dorothy at the end of the movie, where she looks around and she says, everything that I've been looking for was in my backyard all along.
Toto, we're home. Home. Oh, Auntie Em, there's no place like home.
All of the strengths and talents and skills that we need to survive in this life exist within us. And it's just about finding them. It's about cultivating. And when we know that to be true, when we can look on the times when we faced challenge and know that you and me and every single person tuning in today, we have survived the things that we thought were unsurvivable. We've come through the greatest rejections and losses and disappointment and health crises and changes of job status and loss of identity and title and income. And in that moment, we literally said to ourselves out loud or in our own minds, I do not know what I am going to do. And then we went on to figure out what we were going to do. And to me, there's no better case that exists for the fact that resilience exists within all of us. And it's not about whether or not you have it. It's about whether or not we know how to tap into it.
Yeah, I love that. You're 100% spot on. And I think of my own journey of like the times where I've tapped into it. It's not that I didn't have it. I just had to resource it. And there's some practicals around this, so I want to get to that. But before we get to your 5 practices, what is your definition now of resilience? Since Webster didn't give you a very good one at that time, what's your definition? What's the doctor's definition?
Yeah. So in order to come up with these 5 practices of highly resilient people, I didn't just sort of pull them out of thin air. I interviewed hundreds of people and I collected thousands of pieces of data. I looked at documentaries and listened to people's stories and memoirs in order to solidify, like, what are these practices that when we put them into play in moments of the 3 C's, that we're able to create a more positive and productive outcome. And so this is really based on, what we'd call an empirical body of research, right? A lot of people providing a lot of information about how they've effectively faced challenge. And what's come out of all of those interviews is also this definition. And the definition is our ability to effectively face the inevitable moments of the 3 C's. We know those now. Say them with me now: challenge, change, and complexity. Hey. And to ultimately emerge, typically after some time, enhanced by those experiences, not diminished. And that's the definition that I've found for resilience. And what's positive, what is powerful about that definition is also what's not part of it. I sort of think about like negative space in architecture, right? In architecture, negative, it's like what is not present is as telling as what is present. And I think this is true in this definition. What is not present in this definition is quickly recover. In fact, we know now that the people that recover the quickest or the fastest actually have more complications later on. We live in a society where it's considered to be sort of heroic to have surgery on a Friday and be back in the office on a Monday. And yet when we rush that healing or that recovery process, it leaves us vulnerable to more complications later on down the road. And the second piece that's not in the definition is this idea of bouncing back. When did bouncing back become synonymous with resilience? But it has, right? You're so resilient, you bounce back. We don't bounce back. Nobody bounces back. And I can tell you that as I've done keynotes across the globe and, for hundreds and thousands of people, I've had people waiting for me on the edge of the stage saying, I believe that I'm resilient. I believe what you say, that resilience is the essence of being human and it lives within me. And yet I have not gone back to the person that I was before this tragedy, before this, catastrophe or this challenge. And I tell them, yeah, because that's not how resilience works. We don't go back to the way we were before. We bounce forward. We allow ourselves to be fundamentally and forever changed by those experiences.
So good. So good. I mean, even just your example of starting your business in the middle of COVID, there were so many people during that time across the country that was like, we just want to get back to how life was. We just want to get back. We want to go back. And that was just never going to happen. As a country, as a family, as a business, we had to figure things out and then move forward. With however we were going to do them now, it wasn't going to be the exact same. And I think there are some industries or maybe some verticals that have kind of stayed the same or have tried to go back. And I feel like whether they've realized it or not yet, they're probably going to be obsolete pretty soon. Because it's kind of like a natural thing that happens, like you're saying, these circumstances. And what'd you say? It's almost like we allow it to change us, and to move us into the next version, really, I guess. Would you like to add anything more to that? I know I probably stirred that pot a little bit, but
I think it was great. I think there's a lot of people out there who still believe that resilience is about being unmoved, about being Teflon, about being unchanged by our experiences. And in fact, being unchanged by our experiences is the worst thing that we can do. When we ignore our environment, when we ignore our experiences, we become obsolete. We become obsolete in our ability to relate to ourselves and other people and our clients and customers. And over time, we will become extinct. There's a concept, the concept of grit that many people are familiar with. Angela Duckworth also lives here in Philadelphia. She coined that concept of grit. Grit's an incredible concept, right? The idea of like getting gritty, when we face challenge and keep going and put your head down and what's the expression, like keep your nose to the grindstone, right? And yet there are times where it is not helpful to be gritty. It is not helpful to persevere. Blockbuster was super gritty. Man, they were going to keep selling those VHS tapes,
Yep, until we die.
But the market changed. Yeah. People changed and patterns of behavior changed. And unless we allow ourselves to be changed by our experiences, we will become obsolete. We will become extinct.
Hey, kings and queens, Chaz Wolfe. I want to talk to you about something that's super important to me. We put a lot of time and effort, we meaning myself and my team, into this podcast, into the content that goes out every single day. And if you have been getting any sort of value or insight from this, we want it to be able to reach other business owners too. So we would love if you would like, comment, share, leave a review, post, share again, all of the things on social media, on all the different platforms, or even on the podcast mediums of Apple and Spotify. We would love to be able to get our content into more hands, more entrepreneurs, so they can grow their business as quick as possible. Together, we are building a community of like-minded entrepreneurs who are committed to growing their businesses to new heights. So let's do this. Let's help each other. Let's help each other grow.
How does, what you just said is obviously profound and it makes resilience applicable, but let's bring this down to the listener level. They're, driving across town in between projects because they're a construction owner, or they're listening in their office and they're trying to, service their next marketing client. What does this mean for them to be able to either be resilient or to more specifically allow the things that are happening to us to change so that we don't become obsolete?
Yeah. So, there's 5 practices. Let's give you a quick overview of those. So the first practice is the practice of vulnerability. And people are often surprised by that because we often think that vulnerability is the opposite of resilience, especially if we believe that resilience means being unchanged or being unimpacted. Vulnerability also doesn't mean what we think it means. Vulnerability is not about being self-deprecating. It's not about discrediting ourselves. Vulnerability is about allowing our inside self, our thoughts, feelings, and experiences to as closely as possible match outside self that we're sharing with the world, and when those two things are as close as possible, then we're being vulnerable. We're allowing people to see us, to know us, to understand us. The second practice is the practice of productive perseverance. So I talked about this a bit with Grit. It's the art and the science of the intelligent pursuit of a goal. It's knowing when to maintain the mission in the face of challenge, to be gritty, and when to see that the market is shifting and changing, and that in fact, pivoting or even quitting in the face of diminishing returns might be the best decision. Right. The third practice is the practice of connection. Connection is, we always think about community. We think about masterminds. We think about the people that we're connected with externally. What we often tend to overlook is the connection that we have with ourselves, knowing ourselves deeply, understanding our strengths and talents, trusting our gut, listening to our intuition, valuing ourselves, being worthy enough, all of those things. So connection is really two prongs. It's about the connection we have with ourselves and how we cultivate that, and then the connections that we have with other people. The fourth practice is the practice of gratiosity. It's a word that I made up. It's gratitude plus generosity. So the first part is gratitude, which, none of us face a challenging time and say, this is going to make me such a better person. I'm really building character, I was talking to a dear friend of mine last night, and, she was going through a difficult time, and she was like, people keep saying, well, it's happening for you, not to you. It's just sort of this, and she wasn't ready. She wasn't ready to hear that, and so gratitude is typically after some time when we look back on that challenge, even if we wouldn't have chosen it, and say, all right, I can see the good. I can see how I was formed by that experience, changed in meaningful ways, prepared for the next thing that was coming in my life. And then generosity is about generously sharing our resilient stories in a way that uplifts others. One of the things that I'm working on right now is a compilation book called Triumphs of Transformation. And this is a book where we brought together a community of 30 curated authors to tell their resilient stories, to tell their, dark night of the souls. It's sort of Chicken Soup for the Soul meets stories of resilience. And what is so powerful about this? I mean, we all know about the power of story. Yeah. I'm not telling anyone anything you don't already know. But what I've been really struck by is this human alchemy that occurs amidst the storytelling when we take our darkest times and through our own process of healing and integration and reflection, we get to a point where we're ready to share those stories with others. And when we do, we transmute that darkness into a light that we're able to shine on the paths of other people that are in their own moment of difficulty. And so we can, through our own healing and through our own storytelling, in fact, translate that darkness, those darkest moments, into a light that shines on the path of other people, which is incredibly beautiful. And then the fifth practice is the practice of possibility. It's knowing that in every single challenge, we get to focus on progress, not perfection. And it's about being able to recognize that there's both an opportunity and a risk, with every challenge that we face. Okay, so I'm driving across town between construction sites. And how do I do this practically? So I would say the number one opportunity that my coaching clients have across the board is to have a greater awareness how they talk to themselves and the language that they use at any given moment, right? And it's things like even shifting from, I have to go to this construction site, to, I get to go to this construction site. You had one construction site and you and your partner prayed on the fact that you wanted to have a second construction site. You wanted to be able to grow. You wanted to be able to, and now you've got it. And you've got it, and we say, well, I got to go there. I get to, that desire, that vision that I had for myself and how I would expand and grow. Now it's become a reality. There's great neuroscience research to demonstrate that, just when we smile, when we walk into a room and we smile, these nerve endings that are connected with our mouths, that are connected to our brain, signal to our brain, hey, she's smiling, he's smiling, it must be happy, I feel happy, we're going to release some, some dopamine and some serotonin in here. And so the language that we use determines how we think about our lives. What we speak out loud is tremendously powerful. What we say about our lives, what we say about other people, what we say about ourselves. One of the things that I invite my clients to do is to do a self-talk audit, you know? And I call it what follows I am follows you. And what that means is who we tell ourselves that we are in our own brains, that's actually the greatest determinant of our performance today, at what level we're performing at, and of who we will become, of reaching our potential. And every person that I work with is absolutely blown away and convicted by when they really spend 24 hours paying attention to what they're saying to themselves in the real estate of their own mind. They're blown away, right? It's very simple. You take a piece of paper, you draw a line down the middle, you write what are the negative things that I'm saying on one side and the positive things that I'm hearing on the other. And for the vast majority of people, myself included, that list on the negative side, the print gets smaller and smaller as you get close to the bottom. You flip it over, you keep going, right? People are astounded by the level of bullshit that they are saying to themselves in the real estate of their own minds. And this, we are in charge up here, And so shifting that script first, so how do we do this practically? First of all, being aware of the language that you use internally and externally. How do you talk to yourself in the real estate of your own mind? The most important real estate that we own is not the house that we live in. It is the real estate of our own minds. It is what is going on up here and what we are telling ourselves about ourselves and our lives at any given moment. So cultivate an awareness of what it is that you're saying to yourself in your mind, and cultivate an awareness of what you're saying out loud. Are you saying if the deal closes rather than when? Are you saying I have to rather than I get to? Are you speaking out into the world, I'm so grateful for each day? Are you talking about the life that you've created like it's a slog and a burden?
Yeah, these are extremely powerful things and so practical too. I mean, this actually might be my dream come true to have this conversation right here with a PhD level neuroscience wonderful person, because Think and Grow Rich is one of my favorite books.
I couldn't hear anything you said after dream come true.
Yeah, this is a dream come true possibly. Because you're really smart. Let me say it again nice and loud so everybody can hear. We'll make sure that
you gave me a compliment and I just stopped listening.
We're not going to edit that out, okay? But Think and Grow Rich is one of my favorite books, and a lot of the things.
Me too.
Really, this is amazing.
Yes,
I read it
I'm rereading it right now. It's on my nightstand.
It's the only book I reread every year.
Boom.
Actually. So, and we know this, like entrepreneurs, they're listening right now. They're like, yeah, self-talk. I got it. Okay, cool. Think and Grow Rich. Yeah, I've heard that. That's a good book. I've read it once. Okay, yeah, good. But this is deep. This is like real, like you're basically saying, hey, look, all the stuff that's happening that you're not calculating, you're not aware of, it's happening subconsciously. We want to make it conscious so that way you can be aware of it so that you can change it. Other than just creating a list. And maybe that's the easiest way. Because you're right, self-talk is huge. Is there another formula, or in addition to that you'd like to add, knowing that maybe Think and Grow Rich is our favorite here? There's auto-suggestion is what Napoleon Hill calls it from back in the day. But I've made the list, and I'm now consciously aware of the negative piece. And I'm going to try to get rid of that. Or I am going to get rid of that, what they would say. What can I do on the proactive side now?
Yeah, great question. So you do your 24-hour self-talk audit, and you're, blown away by all the stuff that you're saying to yourself that is unproductive, unfair, mean, discrediting, unhelpful, all the things, And you've got some stuff on the positive side. You did say some nice things to yourself and about your life as well. I think it's really hard to change behaviors, like to just get rid of stuff, right? Like when people stop smoking, what do? They start carrying gum around with them. They start carrying carrot sticks around with them, right? Because it's not just about the smoking cessation and getting rid of the cigarette. It's also about replacing that sort of void with a new, healthier behavior. And so the next step after you've done your self-talk audit is, first of all, to really look at what you wrote down, and to take that in. And what was convicting for me, and what's been convicting for so many people about this exercise, is that when you read those things that you're saying to yourself in the real estate of your own mind, it will come to you, as it came to me, that if you were in a relationship with another person who was saying those things to you, that relationship would have been over a long time ago. So why are we allowing ourselves to be in relationship with ourselves and to propagate this stuff that is mean, hurtful, discrediting, untrue? That's the convicting moment. To see the stuff that we're saying to ourselves, that we are actually, so many of us are being abusive to ourselves in our own mind. And oftentimes that's not even our own voice.
That's right.
If you really go and ask yourself, like, whose voice is that?
That's
right? It's the voice of someone else who was, who hadn't done their own work.
That's right.
Let's just say who showed up in our lives. And so then the question is, how could I say more of the positive stuff? I'm a big fan of continuing to do the stuff that you're already doing. If you're already saying, like, just keep saying that. If you make your bed in the morning, keep making your bed, and then add something else onto that. Keep doing the stuff that works. And then look at the stuff that you're saying that's negative and say, okay, what am I going to replace that with? When I hear myself start to talk to myself in that way, what am I going to say that's different? How am I going to challenge that thought? What am I going to say? And so I have a series of questions that we can ask ourselves, right? And so one of those questions, just as an example, because oftentimes we've been saying these negative things to ourselves for so long that it's like, okay, I know that's not right, but I'm at a loss for
what do I replace it with?
What else I would say. It's just like that like sort of trench is so deep, we've been doing it for so long. And so we can say, well, what would I say to someone that I love or care about? How would I talk to that person? And then how can I do more of that, for myself, with myself? And so we start to change, this pattern of behavior. And, Chaz, it's not once and for all. There's no silver bullet. There's no magic pill. Like, I catch myself doing it all the time, right? Sometimes, the negative thoughts turn into, a sense of self-rejection. If I think, oh, I want to reach out to this person and see if I can be on their podcast, or if they would endorse my book, or if they would like to be a part of a project I'm doing. And the little voice in my head will say, they don't want to be a part of your stupid book, and catching that, saying, hold on, right? Like, I'm self-rejecting. And what would it mean if I shifted that script, that imaginary voice in my head, and I said, well, what if they're really excited when they get that, when they get that email, when they've been thinking to themselves that they would like to be part of just this project that I'm about to send them an invitation to be a part of. And so I know that is how we retrain ourselves. Mark Twain said, I've experienced a great many tragedies in my life, and almost none of them actually happened, because we create the greatest tragedies, the greatest catastrophes in the real estate of our own. And what if we could be more free, more loving? We could expand the aperture then of what we're doing with that churn and that energy, and we can give ourselves more resources, and we can give other people more resources. We're seeing a lot of, I won't get political, I promise. We're seeing a lot of, really troubling, wars and atrocities happening across the globe. And so many of us in the United States and other places that are not in the immediacy of a war zone is saying, how do we heal this? How do we create more love? How do we create more compassion? How do we stop this from happening? Well, you know where it starts? It starts with how we talk to ourselves. Because then we have a greater capacity to love others when we're not constantly beating ourselves over the head.
Yeah.
You want to be a great partner? You want to be compassionate and empathetic with your family, with your children, with your employees? Our capacity to love others is limited only by our capacity to love ourselves. And we might say, yeah, but other people are easier to love. The person living in this skin, like she's a little gnarly or he's a little gnarly. Yeah, we can say that until they do something wrong, and then we're like, you're cut off. No? So by doing this work, we stop limiting our potential. We stop putting ourselves down. We stop feeling bad about the hundreds or even thousands of thoughts that are passing through our mind unconsciously, unkind. And we start honing our energy and being conscious and intentional about how we speak to ourselves, how we speak out loud, how we speak to others. And suddenly our capacity increases. Suddenly we have more energy. Suddenly we don't feel so crappy about ourselves when we wake up in the morning. Suddenly we have less anxiety and depression. Why? Because there isn't someone in our head putting us down all the time.
Yeah. This is extremely great work. And you're talking about just the weight of carrying those things around, just I imagine, having a backpack and all of those being a 5 or 10 or a 40-pound weight, and you're just stacking them up. Just, hey, give me my this, give me my anxiety, give me my overthinking, give me my negative thoughts. Like, just put them right here in my pack. I want to carry them around. And a lot of times we dig in our heels on that because even though it's heavy, it's what's comfortable. And I'm sure
It's also what a lot of people think is their leadership edge, quote unquote. It's a lot of people are hesitant to put down this pack, right? To go with your sort of illusion here. Because they think, oh, this is my edge. This is my fuel. If I'm kind to myself, if I let myself off the hook, I start getting soft. And it isn't. People who experience trauma, and then they have symptoms of trauma, they have hypervigilance, they're constantly scanning their environment, they have anxiety. Those symptoms are incredibly uncomfortable, and they don't often want to let go of them because then they believe that those symptoms of trauma are keeping them safe, that those alarm bells that keep them on edge keep them from, experiencing a sort of moment when they should have reacted. And so a lot of the work that we get to do with leaders is to say, actually, you're constantly putting yourself down and never feeling like enough and being unworthy. That's not your secret sauce. That's not the fuel tank. That is the fumes that you've been breathing that you believe are sustainable. Imagine what your capacity could be when you free all of this energy up to feel great about yourself and to be focused on the life that you want to create.
Yeah. I wish we had a 3-hour podcast set, maybe similar to Ed's. I didn't think far enough in advance here to be able to pick your brain for that long, but there's so many more questions I have for you. But today's not the day. I do have one more question that I'm super curious to know your answer to. And I want to know if you had the opportunity to roll back the clock and talk to the younger, not Dr. Taryn, but just the little Taryn. I don't know, maybe it's the 8-year-old, maybe she's a little older. I don't know. Why don't you tell us how old she is? But what do you tell her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would tell myself something different that I'm going to tell you. Well, I'll tell you what I would tell her. I would tell her that everything's going to be all right. Wouldn't that be nice if a future version of ourselves could show up in our lives at 8 or 18 or 48 and say, hey, just so you know, about payroll next week.
It's going to be all right.
Everything's going to be all right. You're like, okay, future me, let's go, right? This is a podcast, and you and I talked about this, Chaz, about transferring courage. And I don't think we can talk about transferring courage without talking about fear.
That was one of my things I wanted to bring up, but I didn't have time.
We did.
Next time.
And we live in a society that is still telling us to be #fearless. And I don't think that's possible. I don't think we want to lose our fear altogether. I think what we get to do is we get to learn to fear less, to not allow fear to stop us.
Yeah.
But if we become fearless, courage goes away.
There would be no need for it.
Bravery goes away because fear is a prerequisite for the transfer of courage.
Yeah.
We can't be courageous and brave without the presence of fear. And so living in this world, living in our lives as an entrepreneur, as a human, I think it is deeply important to acknowledge our fear and to not let that fear paralyze us, to not let that fear be the one that makes the decisions, to not let that fear drive, and to acknowledge that it's there because it serves a purpose. It allows us to be brave. It allows us to be courageous. And in fact, if I go back and I think about my life, the times that I was the most scared, when I was in 3rd grade trying to teach myself to read and I'd thrown down the highest reading group gauntlet, right? When I was in the midst of the pandemic trying to figure out if I was going to keep my house and keep my kids in school, those were some of the times when I was the most scared. And as someone who's profoundly dyslexic, I look very closely at words to see if I'm reading it correctly. And what I found is the word scared and the word sacred, they're the same word, just with the C in a different place. And I think we get to recast our relationship with fear and say, what if the thing that I'm most scared of is not meant to be the thing that I'm supposed to run from or deny my fear around, but instead I acknowledge the fear and then I walk toward it, identifying that likely it is my most sacred opportunity for growth.
Well said. Dr. Taryn, how can the listener find you if they've made it this far in the depths of what we've been talking about? They have got to be mesmerized, and they're wondering how can they find you. They want to listen to maybe your TED Talk. They want to buy your book. Maybe they want to work with you. How can they find you?
I love it. Yeah. You can hit me up on Instagram at Dr. Taryn Marie. I'd love to hear about your impressions of this podcast, what your key takeaways were. So go ahead and grab me there. Send me a DM. I'd love to hear from you. And we'll have all kinds of things in the show notes, of course. You can always hit me up on the website too at resilience-leadership.com.
Perfect. And of course, all of that will be in the show notes. So if you're listening right now and you want to grab any of those resources, they're all going to be right there. But Dr. Taryn Marie, what an incredible opportunity. I have so many more questions. There might have to be a part 2, but I can definitely feel an opportunity for there to be some further work to be done between you and us. And so thank you for being here. Blessings to you and your sons and all of the clients that you're impacting through everything that you're doing this year in 2024. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Thank you for listening to Gathering the Kings today. I hope that you were able to pull out a few nuggets to go apply into your business right away. More importantly, though, I hope that you're realizing that it takes more to be successful than just being by yourself, doing it all on your own, carrying the weight all by yourself. What I have realized, not only in my own journey from multiple businesses and multiple different industries, and now interviewing over 200 or 300 other very successful 7, 8, and 9-figure business owners, is that it's tough to do it alone. And so Gathering the Kings exists to bring together successful entrepreneurs. In fact, we are putting together 1,000 kings, specifically who are grateful but not done. We're intentionally assembling kings who fight tooth and nail for their business, family, and communities. And here's what we believe, that in the pursuit of excellence in those areas, that it ignites within us the responsibility to govern power and forge a lasting legacy. So if that relates and resonates with you, and you know that you need people around you, sharp, qualified, other very successful business owners, I want you to go to gatheringthekings.com. I want you to take a look at what we're doing and see if it makes sense for you to be part of our pursuit to 1,000 kings. Talk soon.